Howdy YouTube, it's been a while, sorry about that, but you know how it is, there's a real job that pays for all of this fun. Last time we talked, we built this stand, cabinet, whatever you want to call it, that holds the dust deputy up here, but it's not there right now. That's because I am getting ready to take this thing apart and start turning this bottom frame into a cabinet that should quiet down the shop vac quite a bit. I knew I was going to do this at some point, which is why I put it together with pocket screws originally. I may put it together with something a little bit stronger than that now that it's going to be permanent. Anyway, let me get this apart and we're going to do step one, which is take these corner leg brace pieces and run them over the dado blade to make a groove for some side panels. Before we start cutting a note or two, when I took this thing apart, I marked the ends with numbers that match up with the top and bottom so that I know I can get the same pocket holes put back together where they were rather than making a bunch of new ones. And the other thing I did is I scribbled a line down the side where I want to waste out the slot for the side panels. I didn't want to cut the slot on the wrong side and have it facing the front or back. So those are all marked and ready to go. The dado set comes with a chart that says, depending on the thickness of your plywood, in my case I have 21/30 seconds, what passes for 3/4 these days. So I have to use spacers and shims and such things to get that exact dimension. Well, sure enough, if I put that together as the chart says, and I get out the calipers, it measures across the dado blade pretty much exactly the same thickness as the plywood. The problem is the arbor has just a little bit of run out, so I actually end up with a wider dado than that. The other thing is I would like these to be exactly centered. It's not strictly speaking a necessity, but it's just kind of a nice cosmetic touch. So what I did is I took the spacer out of the dado set. I made it intentionally about a 1/16 of an inch, a fat 1/16 of an inch narrower than it really needs to be. If I just cut one run on this dado blade, the plywood won't fit in the slot. What that lets me do is run it this way and flip it end for end and run it again. The two cuts combined give me exactly the dado width that I need. You test it on some scrap, and the beauty of this is if it's off a little bit, you don't have to keep taking the dado set apart and putting in shims and taking them out. All you do is you bump the fence one way or the other, give yourself a little bit more room, and you run your piece the two directions, and sure enough, you cut either a wider or maybe a narrower dado. Let's fire this bad boy up and make some dust. Not too shabby, huh? It's a slip fit, meaning I can get it in there by hand, but it'll hold itself, and it is dead center. Corner pieces are dadoed, panels are cut to length and width, and I ran the block plane just down the corner of the plywood panels just to ease the edge of the veneer a little bit, helps to keep it from splitting and cracking while we put this thing together. All right, there's the first side panel glued up. Unfortunately, I only have one set of clamps big enough to hold this thing together, but the glue shouldn't need more than about a half an hour or so to set up. So I'll let this one dry, I'll put the other one together, I'll let it dry, and then we'll come back and we'll put the sides back on. All right, once the panels are dry, you can screw them back onto the base, and for all of my effort to number these things to make sure they went back exactly where they were, I decided that I'd rather have the pocket hole screws on the inside of the box because obviously for a shop vac cabinet, aesthetics are so critical. Since now I don't envision having to take this apart again, I went ahead and glued this whole thing. This is the critical sort of part of the whole thing. What I want to do is I want to leave sort of a serpentine path for the air from the shop vac to get out. What I have to figure out though is how much space I have to work with, minus the thickness of the plywood, and how many times I'm going to be able to get it to go back and forth and still have the path that it's traversing not be so small that it's restrictive. So what I've done here is I've set this 2x4 on top of the vac. This is where the cooling air for the motor comes in. And I figure that 1.5 inch thickness of the 2x4 is the bare minimum that I need to make sure that enough air can get through the motor that I don't burn up the vac. This is 1.5 inch thick. This is going to simulate 2 pieces of plywood going back and forth. So I'm just going to set that on the end over here. That gives me 4.5 inches of space, out of which I can make the air compartments. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to divide that in half to make 2-inch spaces for the air. But what I will do is I will have a piece of plywood that comes, about here, about 2 inches above the vac. Even with the back of the cabinet, it will come most of the way to the front, leaving a gap for the air to come up across the top of that piece of plywood to another sheet that will attach to the front, leaving a gap in the back, and then finally the vent in the front. This will probably make more sense once we start putting the pieces in there, so let's start cutting. All right, what I got here is just a couple of pieces of the plywood cut down to be spacers / shelving. They get glued onto the sides of the cabinet right here in between the legs, and they serve as a mounting point for the plywood shelf that goes in here to start to form the air ducts. When you put the first shelf in here, it needs to align evenly with the back of the cabinet. The first gap for air is in the front. Okay, I have the brackets for the second layer of shelving / ductwork, whatever you want to call it, installed. But before I put that in, I want to install some diversion / baffle pieces. One of the keys to sound control is you want the air to be able to move, in this case, because it's a shop vac. If you were doing a room, then no, airtight would be good. But we need airflow to keep the vac working. But we don't essentially want to build, a big tuned horn for the sound. We want to diffuse the sound, have it bounce around off all these things in random ways so that the sound waves end up canceling out and yet the air can go through. So I'm going to glue all of these things in place just kind of wherever I feel like it, and then we can put the second shelf on. This one aligns even with the front of the cabinet, leaving a pretty big gap here in the back. One of the other things that I want to do is I want to vary essentially the size of the tunnel that I'm building here. So the next layer is exactly the same. There's more baffles. They get glued on in just sort of a random order wherever you feel like it. And then finally we glue the top back in place. Well, YouTube, all of that work to get back not even to where I started. This thing is not, at the moment, operational because I lost my strain relief, my high-tech wire tie. Well, I hate to do this to you guys, but I'm going to have to engage an age-old YouTube tradition where you turn one idea into 2 videos because I am just plain old out of shop time today. And quite frankly, there's quite a lot of glue in here between the sides and all the baffle pieces that I really think I should let dry overnight. So I have put this thing mostly back together so that I can clean up from what I did today. In part 2 of this, I will add some acoustic foam to the bottom of this and maybe across the back here. Wire up an outlet so that I have an outside switch to turn the vac on and off, and I will probably set it up so that there's an outlet to plug a tool into to work with the same switch. And then obviously I need to make the front and back of the cabinet. The front needs to be a little bit shorter than the whole cabinet so I can leave the vent open, and it needs a hole, obviously, for the pipe to come out. And then the back needs to be some kind of a door because as much dust as this catches, it's not absolutely everything. I do need to be able to get at the vac, to take it out, to take it somewhere else, to clean it, whatever. So a couple of pieces left. I'm not going to be able to fit it all in here. What can I tell you? You'll have to stay tuned. And until then, stay safe, YouTube. Thanks for watching.